royals die in their beds, and like most of
lucky.
us, they die there, and everyone knows where they die, and then they die in bedrooms that people later occupy.
Yeah. And the Queen Mother, I think she wrote this in her 70s, but she said, knowing that I would never be happy again, no one would, because every day you heard of someone you knew or someone you knew from someone else, someone was dead.
Yeah. Catherine apparently ran off to try and find Henry VIII in the chapel, failed, and her ghost still now haunts the gallery now, running up and down.
Hello and welcome to this True Royalty original programme with me, Clarence and Bain. For this spooky Halloween special, we're investigating the hauntings that have surrounded the royal family and their residences, past and present. Joining me in the studio to unmask the ghosts and ghouls are historians Professor Kate Williams, who came on a broomstick, and Gareth Russell, who until a minute ago was a fine large black cat. Thank you very much indeed for being with me today. But it's quite an interesting thing. So Halloween, as we know it, as we celebrate it, with all our kind of trick-or-treating and our pumpkins, it's kind of quite a modernish phenomenon, isn't it, historically speaking?
It is a modern phenomenon. We see an early phenomenon, 16th, 17th century, of geezing, particularly in Scotland, going from house to house.
Which is masking up.
But that's masking and it's asking for favours. It's not using the words trick or treat. And really the first records that we've got of people using the phrase trick or treat and children particularly going from house to house is in the late 19th century in the United States. And certainly I think we would say that trick or treating really gained pace post World War II and particularly post the 70s. I think that the influence of American culture was very strong. I think really we might say that trick or treating wasn't that popular during the 70s and 80s, and it really has been a 21st century phenomenon, and such a big phenomenon that really entire roads are taken over by trick or treating, entire towns. Yes.
I mean, thank you very much for taking off time from your trick or treating, by the
Sure.
way. But I think the thing is, Gareth, I mean, having said that, here we are, surrounded by spooky, but actually quite cartoony witches and warlocks and ghosts and ghouls and goblins. But in fact, there is an enormous amount of spooky history, real, scary, spooky history, particularly associated around the royal family and their residence.
Yes, I mean, I suppose Prince William said recently that if it's an old house, there's likely to be a ghost somewhere. And I think if Halloween wasn't being celebrated, which it obviously wasn't for most of the royal family's history, the spirit of Halloween and the ghosts encased within it were something that very much felt their presence felt.
Yeah. So, Kate, if you had to sort of prepare a list of the most haunted royal residences, what would be number one?
Well, as Gareth says, if you grow up in a royal residence, there's going to be ghosts and creaking floors and strange noises all night long. So maybe royals...
Which might be the central heating.
Might be the central heating. Might be the,
or maybe a footman.
Might be the boiler or someone getting lost.
Yeah.
But residences are full of ghosts because unlike royals, unlike the rest of us who often buy our houses new and don't know who lived there before, they knew everyone. And so when you begin there, you've got all these ghosts of traditions. So, it's always very fascinating, isn't it, that there was a dinner service laid for George III long after he died. But in terms of real ghosts, I would say after Gareth's excellent book, Hampton Court is very haunted. I put Hampton Court as number 1, and then Windsor Castle number 2, and then also the Tower. And if you have executed as many people as the royals have, they are hopefully going to come back and haunt you.
Yeah, no, exactly. It is a funny thing though, isn't it, Gareth? Because I think, we're used to this idea of we move into a new house, we change absolutely everything, we make it in our image. So actually, it's always going to reflect our personality. But with the royal family, they're moving from one room to another, which, as you say, Kate, is full of things that actually they know that a forebear has touched. You can see the history. You can see that particular chair is haunted because you still have the imprint of your royal forebear.
Well, that's the thing. The air thickens is a great phrase. There was an Irish aristocrat, Elizabeth Bowen, who wrote about her family home, Bowen's Court. And she said, with every death, the air thickened. With each generation, it became thicker. And you feel all the generations washing up in these homes. And when, as Kate says, you actually can read about them and know in great detail, both family lore and what historians have wrote, the whole building becomes an arc of the past. So you can point at things, and if there's a creaking floorboard or something moving all the time, you start to wonder, is it great granny?
And of course, royals die in their beds, unlike most of us.
Yes.
They die there, and everyone knows where they die, and then they die in bedrooms that people later occupy.
Yeah.
And that, so the bedroom in which, for example, George V was dispatched rather swiftly in early 1936 so that his death was sped up so it would meet the demands of the morning newspapers. Someone will probably use that bedroom now when they go to Sandringham. So
and do you use that bed?
And use that bed.
Yeah.
And you use exactly the same bed. So you are surrounded by these stories. And also when you think about so many royal deaths are so significant, so they're never forgotten. So one of my favourites is Mary Queen of Scots. When Mary Queen of Scots was enjoying a Saturday night, in burst a huge collection of aristocrats and her husband, and they seize her secretary, David Rizzio. They stab him and they throw him down the stairs. And poor Mary is 6 months pregnant. She's in total shock. But this notorious murder is never forgotten. And Rizzio's bloodstain was meant to be there and never went away. In fact, I recently read a diary of the Duchess of Northumberland, who said she visited 200 years later and she said, look, I've seen Rizzio's bloodstain in Mary Queen of Scots in Holyrood Palace in Mary Queen of Scots' room. And they say it can never be moved. Of course, it was being coloured in by the
Of course
maid.
it was.
It was being coloured in with food.
They had a red felt pen every time someone came in.
But the idea
Yeah.
that these deaths and murders and executions are so significant that the ghosts will leave there and the bloodstain can never be cleaned off. Surely everyone who was going to Holyrood Palace in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, they knew that bloodstain was coloured in with food colouring. But they love the story.
Gareth, as a historian, I think there's something rather nice at play here, that there's one day of the year where suddenly the entire country is looking backwards rather than being obsessed by future technology or whatever. And yes, it's looking back spookily, but people do get a sense of what a period felt like, what history felt like through this evocation of ghosts.
Well, I think ghosts, whether you believe in them or not, sort of spectral entities, they are all about the remnants of feelings and the remnants of experiences. It's very rare, I think, in ghostly lore to have a ghost haunting a place where they were happy. That whatever the intrinsic belief system is there, it seems to be somewhere where something traumatic and or important happened. And so when you go in and you have these sort of fabulous arcs of history, you also have arcs of human suffering, and you have all of these really dramatic experiences frozen forever and sort of on repeat track, if you like. And I think it is a lovely thing when we look backwards for a while. And as you say, there's one day where we're looking back, but for royals and for people who live in homes like this, the past is always a little bit closer to the present. The veil is not so thick between past and present in places like this.
This is the traditions of this particular festival in Christianity, isn't it? It's supposed to be the point where you remember all the people that have died, and that this is the point where they're a little bit closer to you.
Yes,
and you're really, you're welcoming them back into your life.
Yes, absolutely. So the tradition is the 3 days, sort of the triptych of grief, if you like, is the 31st Halloween, the 1st of November is All Hallows or All Saints, and then the 2nd of November is All Souls, also known in other parts of the world as the Day of the Dead.
Yeah.
And the traditional belief within Christianity is that it was the point at which the veil between this world and the next was thinnest. And within Catholic Christianity, particularly medieval Christianity, there was a folkloric belief that the gates of purgatory had opened backwards and that the unquiet dead were much closer to the living.
Talking of unquiet dead, there are a lot of royal ghosts that are very unquiet and very displeased, and particularly in Hampton Court, aren't they?
Oh, yes. So as Gareth was saying, these are not the happy ghosts, not the jolly, jolly happy ghosts.
Not the chain rattlers.
No, not the chain rattlers. Not like these are Colonel Fazakerlys in his go bought the whole castle complete with a ghost. And one of the most famous ghosts that we have in Hampton Court is that of Catherine Howard, wife of Henry VIII, wife number 5 out of 6. Now Henry VIII wanted to get rid of her, so he staged a whole setup, didn't he, on 1st of November, and he sat in the chapel and prayed, and then someone told him that Catherine had been unfaithful. Shocking news. Henry gets very upset, and she's literally arrested and sent off very quickly, and he's not going to put her through a trial again because he's realised that looks bad for him, so off with her head. And Catherine's ghost, apparently, when she was told she was going to be arrested, Catherine apparently ran off to try and find Henry VIII in the chapel, failed, and her ghost still now haunts the gallery running up and down.
Yes,
this is what's so powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because this is like a replay of an extraordinary and very, very terrible moment in history.
And a great what if she'd gotten... I mean, actually, there's always this debate about, does the layout of the rooms mean she could have got there? She could have, and it would have been on the 6th of November, I think, sort of not true. But by this point, Henry had left.
Yeah.
So she thought he was still there, and she's desperately trying to
Tragic.
get to him. And yes, as Kate says, she's still allegedly seen moving up and down. Some people say she's screaming, others say it's more quiet. But Hampton Court, that area now called the Haunted Gallery, is the area where most people have reported feelings of dread, coldness. There's been a lot of fainting there. I very, very stupidly, I suggested, so it's my fault, but I suggested doing a podcast episode there at night on Halloween.
Yeah, good for you.
I think not could go wrong. And I was standing underneath one of the chandeliers and I said something like, I don't really think she's here. And the chandelier flickered. And I didn't not believe in it enough not to leave.
Ghostbusters.
Yeah, had to go. I was like, Tracy, pack up, we're going.
We're off. We're off.
You and Tracy
Get
had
out
to
of here
go.
now.
And it flickered at you.
Yeah, they
I
flickered.
have a friend who did feel a sensation of something going past them. I have never felt anything, but I have a friend who felt that. And I think, whether we believe in ghosts or not, just as Gareth was saying, they are a remnant of feeling, an extreme feeling as well. And these terrible moments in which these terrible moments, of shocking moments, will stay in your mind. And we do have the odd happy ghost. So Diana, when she was Princess of Wales, she was convinced that her grandmother was always with her. So I think she was with her in a happy way and advising her. But most of our royal ghosts are the quite scary ones.
Well, but also the thing that's very interesting as well,
ones.
The manifestations are not necessarily just famous people. And I think this is where it becomes more interesting, because it's very easy to say, oh yes, I saw a ghost of Henry VIII, because that's the only person you can
it's never
think of.
Bessie the kitchen maid. It's always someone
But
famous.
sometimes it is. And actually at Hampton Court, there are a variety, isn't it? Elizabeth I's
Sybil Penn,
yes.
Lady Winning. So that is actually, I'm not sure what I believe about ghosts, to be honest. But the only experience I've ever had was at Hampton Court, and I was working in the book, and they would let me totter around, and I came out of the kitchen. So it was like almost like a T junction, if you like, and I had the strongest sensation that someone was looking at me, and that's probably my mind playing tricks or whatever. But later, one of the tour guides said, oh, it's really odd, just around here is where most people say that they felt something. And it turns out that area that I thought someone was looking at me, for whatever reason, allegedly is haunted by the Grey Lady, who, as you say, Lawrence, was Sybil Penn. And Sybil was initially a nursery maid to the future King Edward VI at Hampton Court. So that area would have been where the doors led up to his old nursery. And she stayed in royal service through the reigns of Mary I and into Elizabeth I. And when Elizabeth I was at Hampton Court in 1562, in October, she thought she contracted smallpox. And for about 10 days, her life hung in the balance. And there was real fear about who's going to succeed, what's going to happen. And her ladies in waiting showed both courage and devotion in caring for Elizabeth through this.
Because they would have caught this disease that even if you survive can be very marked.
Yeah, Mary Sidney was
very marked.
Completely disfigured by it.
And sadly, we see this in, even in royal history, when we have these great royal girls on the market, if they catch smallpox, even though they are dynastic marriages, they'll be off the market.
But it was a pivotal moment for Elizabeth surviving that, wasn't it? Because she became a very different, much more focused
she had
ruler.
To, because she saw, and I think,
sadly,
Sybil paid the ultimate price.
Yeah, Sybil didn't make it.
Sybil passed away, and Elizabeth, I think, was devastated, partly because, even though it wasn't her fault, she felt very responsible to the family. The family were well taken care of, but Sybil was buried quite nearby. Her grave was disturbed, and it's not long after that you see the first, again in Victoriana, they love nothing more than a ghost, but you see the first real flush of eyewitness testimonies of seeing the Grey Lady, which is allegedly Sybil Penn. So Queen Catherine, as Kate was saying, is the most famous one, and the one that is seen the most is Sybil Penn, the loyal servant.
Fascinating. So let's go to Windsor Castle, number 2 on your list.
Well, Windsor Castle, we have so many royals buried there.
Yeah.
So Henry VIII is buried there, Jane Seymour is buried there, but another very significant person who was buried there and then was forgotten, was buried there secretly late at night, his head sewn back on and was forgotten, was Charles I. So he's buried in the royal vault and then was forgotten about until the age of George IV. So there are people who've said that he does wander around. And I was told that the tower, the turret, where President Trump and Melania Trump were staying could possibly be haunted. There might possibly be some ghosts
of Charles I,
really?
or just in general.
Well, generally, but Charles I as well might be wandering around
with or
that
without
area.
his head.
Yeah, it's because there's different stories. And some say he's got the head, and some say
Oh, he's carrying it.
he's got it.
He's got it.
But of course, I mean,
Just put it
Windsor.
back on.
I mean, in terms of Halloween, Windsor carries the biggest, spookiest thing, which is Herne the Hunter. The idea of the the hunt that comes out at Samhain and always predicts a royal death. This really kind of very, very powerful pre-Christian belief, and it is the hell hunt.
The hell hunt, and this is Windsor, and predicts the royal death, and it really reminds us how much these traditions are both modern with trick or treating, but they also go right back into prehistory. We never see it, right back into the earliest histories when people use these visions of predictions and spells and ideas and what you might see in the mirror and what you might see behind you, really to try and make sense of the chaos of their lives. And yes, now it's often trick-or-treating and Halloween is often a fun celebration for children, but I think we forget about how significant it was in terms of a religious festival and in terms of a festival for adults to really control their futures.
And also I think it's interesting that hell hunt is tied to your family because, as you said, I mean, some of these traditions are more Scottish, Irish, and also pre-Christian. And in Ireland, the legend of the Banshee, that you hear the scream, it again is only for certain families where that scream is predicting death. So in some cases, it goes really deep into the bedrock of society, seeing families and certain families as the central unit through which we made sense of the world.
So let's move on to Tower of London, because that, I think most people don't really think of that as a palace.
Yeah.
But actually, it had royal occupation up until, certainly up until early modern times. Elizabeth I was imprisoned there, wasn't she?
Yeah.
So what's the ghost count there, Gareth?
Well, the ghost count is pretty high, but actually, as Kate says, it's not as high as she would expect.
Yeah.
Whether because the people who died there thought, I've spent more than enough time here.
I'd like
to go back to Windsor Great Park.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a decent number, though. I think there is a story told by, quite interestingly, a fairly unsentimental tour guide who I was surprised believed this, but he said that on the 19th of May, there is a commemorative service held in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula to mark the anniversary of Queen Anne Boleyn's execution. And allegedly, this tour guide one day was asked by someone, a lady with behind him, she said, what is it that they do this day? And he said, oh, it's to remember Anne Boleyn. And she said, it is good that they still remember. And he turned around and she wasn't there. So whether it was Anne Boleyn turning up to make sure that she was still star billing.
Excuse me?
I just want to make sure that I'm still, I'm above the name
But
title.
just to say, Anne, you have not been forgotten.
The
world remembers you.
Absolutely.
You are more famous than you
kind
ever
of
could have
imagine
imagined.
that of her, actually.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that would be...
There's a brilliant story. Well, also there's a story I think you'll enjoy about her as well, which I'm not really, again, with seances. If there's a seance I believe in, it was this one. So at Hampton Court in the 1920s, Lady Baden-Powell held a seance. And allegedly, the ghost of Anne Boleyn came through to tell her that she hated what she'd done with the apartments. Which actually, I kind of can see.
When you think that Anne Boleyn, when she was executed after less than 3 years as Queen Consort, that the apartments that she and Henry had been renovated were not ready. So her bedroom was not fully decorated. You can see why she might want to into design questions now.
And I mean, she was this great trendsetter, fashion forward, coming from France, and she was bringing this new style with her and everything.
She changed this huge impact on Anne, vibrant and young and fascinating.
But then she has to deal with Lady Baden-Powell's pastels everywhere.
I know, exactly.
Absolutely devastating.
But it's interesting, isn't it, how much seances soar after World War I. So we see them soaring during and after World War I. And I think that, in times of crisis, we do often turn to seances and all kinds of spiritualists in times of crisis.
I mean, again, this is what's quite interesting, is that seances, as we understand them, are actually, again, relatively new. That, they've been ceremonies to summon the dead since the dawn of time. But actually, this specific ritual of the seance really comes through in the late 19th century, isn't it? It's part of the whole spiritualism movement.
They see it as pseudoscientific. They really do. And actually, one of the things that I always would try to remind myself was that we shouldn't take it as read that this is demonstrable nonsense, because actually many of the seances were in the spiritualist craze, but how it was explained to me when I read some of the contemporary sources was this is a period in the Victorian era when everything is changing so rapidly, and things that they once thought were impossible, like being able to send a message across the Atlantic in Morse code, the world is collapsing. So if you can find a way to send messages across distances that you once thought were unimaginable to breach. Why can't you send them between the worlds, another unimaginable breach?
Absolutely.
To us, we know the difference, but they're the ones doing the investigation.
Well, they've had to completely recalibrate things with things like the theory of evolution.
Yeah.
That, for generations and generations, it's been very straightforward. It's been Adam and Eve, dum-de-dum-de-dum. They found dinosaurs. They've got Charles Darwin. Actually, as you say, science is sort of leaching into spirituality and trying to sort of focus, trying to make sense of it.
And where do you know where science is? And when we think that the last person to be prosecuted for witchcraft in this country was in World War II, and it was Helen Duncan, who was seen as uncovering state secrets because she knew that a ship had gone down, and so she's prosecuted under the Witchcraft Act, which obviously dates back to the witchcraft hunts in the 16th, 17th century. Churchill thinks it's ridiculous, and he says, okay, we're not having this anymore. And the next law is now the False Mediums Act. So we don't have the Witchcraft Act anymore. We have the False Mediums Act, I suppose, defrauding people through mediums. But people were genuinely believed in the possibility of witchcraft well into
all the way
so it was prosecuted in the courts in the World War II. And
I think people still, I think that a surprising number of people are still oddly sympathetic. I mean, to the idea of it. I mean, even when some of the memorials were being put up for the victims, there were some people from certain religious communities saying, but we can't be certain they weren't witches, which was genuinely shocking for me to hear.
Well, we again, we have to sort of redefine what witchcraft is and what witches are, because fundamentally back then it was anyone that didn't believe the way that the mainstream believed. But they were actually possibly believing something
it's
much
interesting
more
also there's a linguistic difference. So if you look, for instance, at the Scottish witch hunts, where they all happen is where Scots or English is the dominant language. In the Highlands, they don't happen because Gaelic has so many different words to delineate light magic, dark magic. It's the same in Ireland, it's the same in Wales. They don't really have witch hunts in the way the Scottish
and also James I, of course, drove them so heavily. And that's another possible witch that we have in Holyrood, which is Agnes Sampson, who was a guiltless older woman, as we know. So many of the women were just older women that society didn't want anymore, or they were healers. He interviewed her, determined that she was one of the witches who'd caused his wife's ships to be rocked about by the waves, and then she was tortured.
Well, he was the one that really had the big psychosis about witchcraft.
Well, initially he didn't. Initially he was complete. He thought they were nonsense. And he was bounced into it, and like many people, the convert Zeal is frightening.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he thought this is nonsense, and then he was fatally converted. And that to me was almost more frightening, because actually James then, for these two lethal years in 1519, 1591, is pushing and pushing it because he believes he has uncovered something. Whereas some people who maybe believed in witch hunting for longer actually weren't as zealous as he was. And it's not unique to him. It happens in many, many cases. But in this case, you end up with 70 victims.
But in terms of the royals, and in terms of the royals potentially wanting to reach out and talk to people that are no longer here. I mean, obviously, this is something that Victoria is very focused on, having lost Albert at a very young age, the great love of her life, the obsession, the passion of her life. How involved in spiritualism and seances was she?
Victoria kept Albert's belongings just as they had been. There's a wonderful book in the Royal Library at Windsor, which was the book that she was reading to him, and the bookmark where she stopped because then he died is there, and it's going to stay like that forevermore. So Victoria kept his belongings, his rooms, the shirts laid out. But in terms of contacting him via spiritualists and seances, I think Victoria had a very strict idea about the afterlife and about her vision. And so I don't think that witchcraft and seances...
So it's sort of much more kind of like mainstream Christian, that he had, he'd ascended to heaven, she will join him
heaven
later.
Doesn't talk back.
Exactly.
That's the thing. So I think that's exactly it. And I think, as Kate says, what is happening alongside the spiritualist craze are deep, deep concerns within mainstream Christianity. Now, there are many Christians who dabble in both, but there starts to become quite a strong moral campaign that they will say, if you read the Bible, you look at the story of the Witch of Endor, you look at the summoning of the spirit of Samuel the prophet. The Bible is very clear that...
leave it alone.
Yeah. Even today, some mediums, for instance, or card readers will not touch talking to the dead, because that's the line you don't cross. Right. And that you should not summon up the spirits of the dead. So spiritualism and Christianity have a very, very uncomfortable relationship with each other. And increasingly, by about the 1960s, 1970s, Christianity has pretty clearly delineated there should be no, ne'er the twain shall meet kind of thing.
So it's quite a surprise to hear that the late Queen Mother actually was quite an enthusiastic spiritualist, and did seek out seances, spent time at seances.
The late Queen Mother, of course, grew up in this time that we
Yes.
were talking about, in which World War One was crafting your lives. You had no idea whether your brothers, for her brothers, whether your brothers, your husband, your father were ever going to come back. And of course, she did suffer the loss
Yeah.
in her family.
Fergus was killed at the
Fergus-
Battle of
Which
Zeus.
devastated her,
And
didn't
she
she?
Just
never-
destroyed her, and
yeah.
also, I mean, to Kate's point, when you say brothers, so Fergus was killed
Mm.
when she was 15, I think, and then, but the other thing for the Bowes-Lyon family was there were 4 brothers at the front, so Patrick and Jock come back physically intact but mentally destroyed. I mean, they had PTSD. They called it shell shock, but the 4th brother, Michael, is captured and goes to a German prisoner of war camp for 2 years.
So he's missing, presumed
dead.
dead. The worst message you can get in the war.
Awful, because you're in this purgatory of where is my child, or
Yeah.
where is my brother. And the Queen Mother, I think she wrote this in her 70s, but she said, I remember on my 17th birthday, so this is 1917, knowing that I would never be happy again. No one would, because every day you heard of someone you knew or someone you knew from someone else, someone was dead.
Yeah.
And that was just what the 4 years from 14 to 18 were like for her.
Mm.
And as you say, I think generationally, it's really significant, because she is also a very devout Christian. So her mother, Cecilia, was the daughter of an Anglican clergyman. Every morning when they grew up, the Queen Mother's morning was breakfast tea with mummy, and they'd read a chapter of the Bible and pray. Like, it was a very traditionally Christian upbringing. But it also was a Victorian Edwardian upbringing, when that clear delineation between Christianity and spiritualism had not yet
been defined.
Yeah.
Because also, of course, she's growing up in Glamis Castle.
Yes.
And you both mentioned Glamis Castle. Because
All the Macbeth ghosts.
It's
All
just
of them.
all of them. I mean, it really, not necessarily a royal residence, so we can't kind of put it up in the list, but definitely it's somewhere.
It's probably the most haunted. I mean, the legend isn't it's the most haunted building in
The
Britain.
most haunted building in Britain, that we might see the Macbeth tale going back there. I think it was a lodge nearby Glamis Castle. So
there's also the Beast of Glamis.
There's the Beast of Glamis.
The poor child that was imprisoned, immured.
Yeah.
Was bricked
Although,
into
so
a
that's
tower.
the one she didn't believe in. It's the
Okay.
only, but it's the only one.
I like the way she's done that though. She
She
said
said no, that one's not. She said that one's nonsense, because she said there was a hidden room, and she said there were no hidden rooms in Glamis.
Yeah.
She said there was the ghosts always made you know where they were. So she said the only one she was really frightened of was Duncan, killed by Macbeth, and she used to run through the hole when she was sent there on errands. The one, actually, to Kate's point on the witchcraft, the one that was another Grey Lady, and it was her ancestor Lady Glamis, who was burned as a witch by James V in 1537, and they all were a little bit frightened of her, and particularly the Queen Mother's sister Rose was terrified of the Grey Lady. And there's a letter from Queen Mother's
Grey
mother.
Lady.
Poor
She was
Grey-
just
I
trying
know,
to
I
make
feel for the Grey
friends.
Lady.
Well, the Grey Lady.
She
I
got
feel sorry for the fact
burned.
she's in grey for a start.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
do you know what I
It's
mean?
Well-
why do ghosts always have to wear grey? Why can't they
well,
wear
I
something
know
more
it's raining.
vibrant? I know.
Well, it's
I
also
feel
it's
the
about a
same.
gentle color palette, I think.
Yeah, I think.
But so the Queen Mother knew that Rose, she was a child at this point. Rose was terrified of the Grey Lady, and there's a letter from their mother Cecilia saying, "Darling, do we think that it was very kind to dress up as the Grey Lady and jump out at Rose in the middle of the night?" And so they weren't. I mean, they kind of coexisted with them, and there were stories of the tongueless ghost who was a servant from the Middle Ages who knew a secret had her tongue ripped out. And then there was the drummer boy, one of the Ogilvy drummer boys who you could hear beating the drum at night. And then the one that is sort of the perfect synthesis of the Queen Mother's belief in ghosts and her Edwardian manners was the trapped soul of the Tiger Earl of Crawford. So the Earl of Crawford had come in the 15th century and was in a feud with the Queen Mother's ancestor, the then chief of Clan Lion. And he couldn't bear the thought of losing any more to the lions. So while on this visit to Glamis, he sold his soul to the devil and could still be heard in the room playing cards with the devil to get his soul back, his ghost. And when the current Earl of Crawford came for a weekend shooting, all the children were told, "Now, it's very rude to mention that his ancestor's soul is trapped in a satanic pack upstairs. So we don't mention that.
We don't. But let's move over
It's
that.
so rude.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
I
so
completely
rude.
agree. But this is fascinating, because I mean, also she was a very sensitive woman. She was a very thoughtful woman, as you say. She was a very religious woman. And then we know that when her husband died, and this is very unexpected as well, George VI. I mean, he'd not been well, but he was sort of,
He's only in his 50s.
Exactly.
He's still very young.
It felt like a tragedy. Also, there was a lot of baggage in that she was quite, he'd never supposed to be king. His brother had decided to abdicate to be with the woman he loves, all that kind of stuff. But she then does, we know, start visiting spiritualists.
Well, it's also, I think, probably from a historical perspective, one of the reasons to the shock that you spoke of is the way cancer was dealt with at the time, which is actually the decisions were taken that you didn't tell the immediate family. So there was double the amount of shock. She knew he was ill, but until he died, I don't think she knew just how seriously ill he
They used
was.
to operate. They operated at Buckingham Palace.
She
didn't they?
she thought he was fine.
You wouldn't actually be in a hospital speaking to doctors in the same way that we would now.
She really, I mean, she did not think that when Elizabeth and Philip set off on that tour that Elizabeth would be returning queen. She really was in total shock. And as Kate says, much of these traditions arise from making sense of the world.
Yeah.
And so, yes, she does reach out to a very well-known medium who lived, I think, in South Kensington, and she was brought to Clarence House, where the Queen Mother had moved as a widow, to conduct a seance. Now, there are different accounts. I tend to believe the one that says Elizabeth II didn't take part in it, because I think she was much more on that much more low church delineation of you don't do this, whereas the Queen Mother was a little bit more high church and a little bit more of that Victorian Edwardian era. But allegedly, Princess Margaret did get involved in them as well.
Which again, you can see. There's another very religious person, very thoughtful person, but someone that's actually quite good at expressing themselves in their own way.
And I think what the Queen Mother, I think she was I don't think she knew what she wanted from this. As in, some people go in knowing they want an answer to a question. I think she was really bewildered. And if you read some of her letters, she was stoic, but if you read some of her letters from the year and a half after the king died, I mean, she is really grieving. She talks in one letter to a friend about she took a book of poetry out to sit by a river, and she says, I feel as if grief has knocked me around and I don't know who I am anymore.
She's so overwhelmed, isn't she? Because she had a role. She had a very clear delineated role.
And no one had done a Queen Mother.
Consort. And now she's this awful word Queen Dowager, and of course her daughter is now very occupied.
But also the role was completely defined by the war, and actually she really she hit the ground running.
Absolutely.
The war. She was so brilliant at unifying the nation. So
Hitler said
suddenly find yourself jobless.
He was afraid of.
Yeah, exactly. But also wasn't Marina of Kent there as well?
Yes, Marina was big on them, big believer. And also, but Marina also comes from a similar-ish background. What I mean by that is Marina of Kent is so closely tied to the Romanov family, and that generation have known nothing but loss. And in their case, there are a lot of family members who are permanently missing, presumed dead. They vanished during the Red Terror.
But of course, Marina's husband was killed tragically in an air crash. That even today feels slightly mysterious to a lot of people. So again, you can see that kind of that moment of not being able to understand why this person is no longer there.
Yeah, and again, Marina, she's a young family. There was, again, to Kate's point, a lot of this comes back to shock and trying to. Sorrow was one thing, shock with it is another. And there's a letter the Queen Mother went up to Caithness, where she ended up buying the Castle of May, but she went up to stay with the Viners, and she had come out as a debutante with Doris Viner, and she was godmother to Doris's daughter, Elizabeth, who died of meningitis serving as a wren in the war, and then her brother was killed in the war. And so again, you're kind of in the Second World War, you're having this alliance of grief. And when they go up, the Queen Mother writes that what Doris would do is, she'd say, right, well, we're going to walk along the cliffs today. And every day they would walk a little bit further to sort of, and said the Queen Mother said, actually, she's right, when the wind blows and it stings your face, you feel the vastness and how eternal all things are. So I think both in nature and in the seances and in her Christian life, and all of these things that maybe don't necessarily look like they fit together as a jigsaw, here is someone who is trying to process immediate grief through something that's eternal.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, isn't it, that I think it's an interesting irony, isn't there, that her granddaughter-in-law, Diana, Princess of Wales.
I was going there because, of course, this is the big, the sort of celebrity scoop, was just how much Diana relied on spiritualist advice.
And how much she saw a spiritualist, she saw various spiritualists. And I think it's often something we forget that Charles and Diana do have in common. They're both interested in the spiritual world.
Absolutely.
And they're interested in alternative ideas. And yet, even though Diana was visited, and I think we can say that she visited more and more spiritualists as she felt more and more distressed in the marriage and more overwhelmed by anxiety and misery, And yet she and the Queen Mother don't see eye to eye at all. They really, these two women who have so much in common, and because as you say, Elizabeth II, we're not going to see her going to a spiritualist over Tesco in Fulham Park Road. I mean, that's just not going to happen. But Diana does do that, and yet these two women who've both been through so much don't see the connection. They really don't get on at all.
And they also, what was interesting was, I think you forget that when the future Queen Mother married into the royal family, there were incidents where she was so popular that her safety was at risk. She went to a family wedding at St. George's Square and she was mobbed by people. And someone next to her said, you saw the moment where her blue eyes became frightened because the press of the crowd trying to get to her was so much that it was overwhelming. And obviously Diana is in that state and magnified. But they don't find it a lot of comfort.
A man leapt out at the Queen Mother in Windsor Castle, didn't he? Leapt out from behind a curtain.
Yeah.
So she'd been through all these. But
and that wasn't a ghost.
That was not. That was a real person.
It was a real one.
A real person.
But let's sort of bring it a bit more up to date. And so it's we don't find the celebration of Halloween as being something that's sort of a big part of royal history, but it's like they've been making up for lost time. I think you think of the sort of the extraordinary revels that the younger generation have been involved in. There was that moment where Catherine turned up as a very sexy-looking witch.
It was Mahiki, wasn't it?
It was Mahiki.
Mahiki after her breakup with William.
Yes.
When as she said she was going to live life to the max.
Yeah.
She was a single lady. A glamorous witch came to the Mahiki Halloween party, and I think Mahiki is no longer with us. I think it was down the side of
down
the side of Green Park Tube, wasn't it?
It was like walking distance.
Distance from Green Park Tube, and I knew where it was. I never went, but I'm sure it was the Mahiki. The Mahiki Halloween party was a riot. So obviously Kate comes from a family who parties come first. Her mother, Carol Middleton,
they do them. They make them.
They make them. She wrote, she wrote on the blog about how much she enjoyed carving pumpkins and dressing up. And I think that we know that Kate and William have similar traditions now. That Kate was spotted in a Sainsbury's, I believe, or another supermarket in Norfolk buying Halloween items. And I think
she used to take the children around Kensington trick or treating or somewhere.
Tamara Eccleston's husband, Jay Rutland, I think, snapped a picture of them going up and down that huge street just next west of the embassies and royal residence are just next to Kensington Palace, trick or treating and
which would be safe
sweets
for them there as well. I think.
Yes, the pub's not going to be ambling back. Well, I mean, no one would. The thing is, if you did go out trick or treating as a royal, it would be like when the Queen was spotted by tourists in Windsor. No one would really believe.
You'd think that was the costume.
Yes, you think,
that's quite good. You look exactly like Queen.
You look just like Princess Charlotte.
Amazing. But there's also the I think the one to end all costumes was when Prince Harry turned up at a Hollywood Halloween party wearing Tom Hardy's costume from Mad Max. How cool is that?
That's a very good one.
And what I love about that is that Meghan says, we all went out and no one recognised us and we had a marvellous night in the town. And it really reminds me of all those royals who go out incognito and say, no one recognised me.
No one had the faintest
idea. Mary Queen of Scots went out with Lord Darnley saying, no one knew it was me in Edinburgh. You think, yes, they did. They probably did think it was. But so when you're a royal, you can get hold of these really marvellous Halloween costumes. Although you were just talking about dinosaurs, Lawrence, and apparently I did read Meghan saying that they tried to dress Archie up as a dinosaur for some Halloween tweeting, but he wasn't really into it.
Not feeling the vibe.
Not feeling the dinosaur vibe. But yes, I think royals are never going to publish their Halloween costumes on their Instagram for pictures for us to see. But I think we'd all love to know who dressed up as a pumpkin, who dressed up as a witch, and who dressed up as a skeleton. But we may never know whether Prince William has ever dressed up as a pumpkin or not.
There we are. Thank you very much indeed. I know you've both got a trick-or-treating to get on with.
Absolutely.
I think your broomstick is parked outside and you better get back into your black cat costume. Well, that's all we've got time for on this show. Thank you very much indeed to my guests, Professor Kate Williams and the lovely Gareth Russell, for dusting off so many palace ghosts and palace ghost stories. Do keep the conversation going on our socials. Just search True Royalty TV. See you next time. Woo.